On today's episode, Benny, we're going to talk about Freud's theory of Eros and Thanatos.
Living and dying.
The yin and the yang.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Cabal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Cabal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
All right, Benny boy, Slim. We're going to talk about Freud's Eros and Thanatos theory today. I know, it sounds like a snooze fest.
Is that life and death?
It actually absolutely is.
Ooh,
and we're gonna talk about how he came up with this, what it means, and maybe even go into some people not liking it and how a lot of people think that it hasn't withstood the test of time, if you will. But let's start with this. Okay, so whether you like him, you don't like him, you don't know who he is, Sigmund Freud is one of the most probably talked about names when it comes to psychology. He has come up with a lot of things, but I think the big thing that I like to think of him as is he was able to come up with the idea of the unconscious mind, in that there is stuff going on in the backdrop of our brains and we may or may not be aware of it.
Is that you're talking about like the id, the ego, and the superego?
Sure, but I mean, we could talk about that too, but I'm talking about ultimately that there is themes or narratives going on in our brains that we may or may not be aware of.
I can agree with that.
Why we do what we do. So the idea was, back in the old 1920s, right?
Back when I was your age, Sonny.
There was a book written by Sigmund Freud. It was Beyond the Pleasure Principle. And we all know that Sigmund Freud was obsessed with sex. Talked about it a lot, discussed it, and basically stated that it was one of the most inherent drives that we have, and it keeps us alive. And it keeps us to procreate. So anyways, in this idea, when he was talking about the idea of Eros, right, he's talking about how it basically is the life, right? It's the life part of our Eros, or basically our beliefs. We want to survive. We are going to do things to make sure that we stay healthy. We're going to do things to procreate. And basically, we're going to do everything we possibly can to survive, right? Survival of the fittest.
Gotcha. Cool.
Okay.
Move on.
Okay, so with that being said, there's the flip side of the coin, right? Which is the Thanatos, which would be like the death side, the death instinct, right? So this death drive, if we will, or this instinct, is basically the idea that although we have this intrinsic or this deep feeling to survive, but we also want to die. Now, here's where it gets sticky, right? So a lot of people are going to discuss that, Thanatos, right, would be this internal belief of chaos or self-destruction or
Suicidality.
Okay, so that would be the internal, right?
No, okay, suicidality. Sorry. I get it. You're
so
talking
the
about
external would be more of like an addiction or self-destructive behaviors.
Gotcha. Okay,
right?
That makes sense.
So, but basically, this is in contrast to the life, right?
Gotcha.
So, basically, what he's saying is there's this basic play that's going on in our lives every day where we want to survive, we want to live, but there's this almost like subconscious part of us that's really wanting to die.
So the ultimate goal is to die.
The ultimate goal is to die, right?
So it's like a yin and yang. Like you are consciously you're striving to live while knowing that at the end you need to die.
Correct. So basically what he was saying is that we have this weird drive to, when it comes to trauma, to either relive it or to replay it over and over again. So one of the things he talked about was this idea of soldiers, right? And talking about PTSD, and he was talking about how, one of the reasons that they would have these recurrent post-traumatic, dreams or thoughts was that they were trying to relive it. So it's this idea that our brain tends to also want to go to death. And that's the reason why this occurs.
It's okay. So the conversation then is, I would have to, in my subjective experience, I would say there's truth to that. There's absolute truth to that. But I can also see the struggle of admitting that we are striving for death, right? Because it's like a marathon, right? Knowing that there is a finish line, meaning death. So here's my thing on that. So is there a healthy way to balance the living, the Eros versus the Thano?
So what I really liked about this whole idea and what Freud was basically talking about was the idea that if you understand your both self preservation part of yourself and the self-destructive part of yourself, that will be helpful to living a healthy, well-being kind of life.
That's a really big way of saying if you're not talking about death, you're not living.
That's exactly
okay.
Why
So it's basically it's 100% exactly our motto.
So the idea is that if we're able to address and accept that there is this part of us that is striving for to survive, and there's a part of us that wants to die, right? And accepting that there is always going to be this internal struggle, then you're able, by talking about it, by exploring it, by dissecting it, you don't let either one get out of hand, right?
Okay.
So basically what I was thinking about when I was reading about this in my spare time that I don't have any of, was this idea that if we know that talking about death is an important facet to living life, right? And we feel that by talking about death, by exploring our own demise, by discussing how we want to go, right? We can at least maybe challenge ourselves to live a healthy life to meet that goal, whatever that looks like.
Right. So in theory, talking about death in this, however, this scenario, right, would be natural medication, because obviously you would be medicating not only your body, your physical body, but your mental body too, right? So it would be a spirit mind kind of thing too, because you're actually giving your body nourishment by actually talking about death and actually exploring death, right? Is that basically? So my thing is, Doc, so this goes against, like, obviously death anxiety, right? If you are fearing death so much that you won't even experience or you won't even think about it, you can't live a healthy life, because therefore you're not doing the yin and yang of the process.
Well, I think you said your verbiage wrong there. I think
death anxiety. I mean,
you were saying
extreme.
that death anxiety has a part in this. Absolutely, right? So the more and more that we fear death, the more and more we don't accept that part of us.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not feeding that part of us, right? And this kind of goes into this idea of one of the big, I guess, people are. Let me say this: not all theorists / psychologists sign up for this, right? Because they're worried that basically by stating that there's these two parts of us, that we're almost like glorifying death, right? We're glorifying this part of us that wants to.
Can I stop you there? What's the problem of glorifying death if you're also glorifying life with it?
Because then they're basically saying that we're encouraging behaviors like suicide.
Okay,
by glorifying death,
I understand that, but they're missing half the other equation, which is healthy living.
It goes to our culture. I really truly believe it goes to our culture. We are so death fearful, or death running away from death. Right. We are
avoidant, death avoidant.
There we go. That was the word I was
You're welcome.
for.
I'm just
appreciate it. So we're such a death avoidant culture that I think the idea of even talking about this subconscious urge that we all have is basically saying it's okay that we have this. And in my opinion, I think it is okay. I think it is okay to talk about this, and I think it's okay that we all have this part of us, right? I think that we all have tendencies to be self-destructive. I think that we all are terrified of actually living because we're fearful of screwing up or making the wrong decision or not living to our true potentiality. I think the other part of it that I wish that some of these theorists or psychologists that are, basically saying let's not talk about this because it's too dark. We don't want to, we don't want suicide copycats. And in my thought process is that I think one of the things that we've really done wrong in our culture is that we've shunned talking about topics like death or like suicide. So if we're able to explore them in a healthy way with people that are educated on this, and we educate our youth and we talk that it's okay to have, this dark side of you, this, because like, again, I've always been a firm believer, without sadness, there is no happiness. Without
100%.
death,
There's no life.
there is no life, right? There's always a yin to a yang. And my thing is that why don't we just, instead of being fearful of it, why don't we just accept it and talk about it?
Well, I think we have been hitting this nail over and over and over again, but I think the big thing is a healthy median, right? The idea that you are understanding that death is the finality, but also realizing that I also want to live till I get there, right? Like it'd be like skipping a whole marathon just to get to the end. You can't do that. Like you have to experience both sides of it. You have to experience life to be able to experience death. So for people who are saying that you're glorifying death, the counterpart with that would be, well, you're not actually understanding what the whole theory is about. Because the theory...
Well, no, I think it's not that you don't understand it. I think the minute that you start talking about this idea that there is this self-destructive, very dark death wanting or longing for death part of you, they're afraid that is basically saying that it's almost okay for people to want to end their lives, right? I don't think it's okay. I want to change the black and white thinking there, but I think it's also very important to understand that there is a lot of people, and I would even go to say in my experience that there is way more people that think about suicide than we know or that we acknowledge. So my thing is again that knowledge is power. By being aware of this other side, we can help people understand, minimize, and ultimately distance themselves from self-destructive thoughts. So instead of saying we can't talk about this because it's going to bring about self-destructive thoughts, I would challenge that by talking about this, we're actually decreasing the power of the self-destructive thought.
Because I was going to say, by pushing it or hiding it in a closet somewhere, right? You're adding the isolation to the person that's already dealing with too much isolation.
Well, it festers, right? We know this. If we bury emotions or thoughts or feelings that we are scared of or terrified of, then we don't give ourselves the adequate time to explore them, challenge them, confront them, dissect them.
So in your opinion, Doc, and maybe you have a different opinion personally than you do clinically, do you like this approach that Freud has?
I don't necessarily think it's an approach. I think it was just a thought process, right? He was basically exploring this idea that there is these two hemispheres of us. There's this one hemisphere that is all about keeping ourselves alive and keeping ourselves healthy and all this stuff. And then there's this other part that's conflicting with it going, well, I mean, isn't the goal, honestly, of this whole thing is to die?
Has there been any future research on this? Like, has anybody talked about this topic other than Freud?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, there has been a lot of negative opinions towards this because, again, they're saying that it glorifies death. And I also think that some people, I guess I would be very curious for other cultures, their opinion of this topic. I think that it really fits at least our American death avoidant culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really, again, I'm not necessarily saying that it's completely right or completely wrong. What I am saying is I think it's a great idea to talk about, because to me, I think what he was talking about with this idea of like, let's bring this to light, right? Let's bring the subconscious mind to consciousness. And by doing that, then we have the awareness to have responsibility to change it.
Well, I think all these incredible thinkers, right, are after good conversation of bringing up topics that a lot of people right away would shut down, right? And the idea, Doc, too, people might listen to us and occasionally think we're too much death positive. Probably some, especially those who are very uncomfortable.
You know what? I would change if you are one of those listeners out there that are thinking that, I would challenge you to change the word positive to acknowledgement. Like, we are death acknowledgement. We want to just talk about it, right? We're not saying that it's good or bad, even though we might have our subjective experiences with it and think that it might, I always make the comment with a lot of my clients that I think death is beautiful.
I do too.
Death brings a lot of self-awareness. I think it brings a lot of
closure,
growth, and I think it also brings positive change in a lot of people's lives. As with the heartache of the grief, they learn a lot about themselves, and they learn who they really want to be and who they really want to become. But again, that's my subjective experience. I'm not saying that everybody has that, but I would say if you're really stuck in there, like, I think they're glorifying death, or they're too positive about it, I would challenge you to think about it in the other way of, like, I think they're just really adamant about exploring it. And that's what I would love for a lot of the listeners out there to understand. Like, this whole idea was to explore our own thoughts, so that we can get people, hopefully like you, that are thinking, well, yeah, but what about this topic? Have you ever thought about this? And it's like, oh no, I haven't. Let me sit with it. Let me sit with that.
That's one. Well, and that's the thing too. If you're out there and you think that way, or maybe you really like this topic, or maybe you never thought of it that, like, living that way, feel free to write us on our email at letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com, and we would love to read what you all think of when it comes to this, because I actually think this is really, there's a lot of pieces to this, Doc. Like, this is kind of a huge piece of pie to eat for most people, I would assume. That's a lot.
Well,
that's a lot.
And again, it's like when we talk about theory and we talk about existentialism and stuff like that, like, obviously this is stuff that I've read about and listened to a lot of lectures and did my own research about. And again, a lot of these theories, right, are just that. They're theories,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're ideas that I think have a lot of light to them, and I just want to share them, because I think the other thing out there that I want people to know is that we're not the only ones that thought that this is something that we need to talk about. And again, I'm bringing Freud into this because if you talk about Sigmund Freud, most people know who he is. So,
well, I think at the end, Doc, the real important part of this is it's an equal. It isn't one way or the other. There has to be a balance in the pendulum of this life versus death thing, right? This Eros versus Thanatos, like, and those beautiful words. But I think, Doc, after talking about that and digesting all that, maybe we should get to a Q&A.
Absolutely, let's hit a Q.
Q&A, everyone loves that
Q&A, gotta get me that.
Q's and A's, bum bum bum.
I'll let you go because I talked a lot on that one.
I got you.
All right, Benny, boy, here is the question. All right, here we go. What age do you consider it normal to prepare for your death / think about dying? I personally believe that it's 75 plus, maybe 80 if you are healthy. Is that a correct time to think about it, or will you just wing it until the time comes?
I do like the wing it idea, but I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's subjectively, right? This is my experience. Like what I give if someone asked for my opinion, I think, well, I guess they are, right? They're asking for the opinion. So here's my thing. I think that's way too late. I always bring this up when I talk to the high schoolers. I bring up that, and maybe this doesn't exist as much as it used to, but for a while I would go up to the women in the room and I'll say, what do you guys think of about, and you kind of like already plan and you have these books and you have these like thoughts of dresses and all that kind of stuff at this high, and I'm basically like a 5-6-year-old. And one girl will always like raise her hand and say, my wedding. Like, I have my wedding already planned at 6 years old. And I look at them, and these are teenagers, right? They're in their later teens. I say, I find it very interesting that you plan something that you may or may not ever do, but you don't plan your own death. And that always kind of like opens their eyes. I don't necessarily think, I think every person has a different age that's perfect for them. But I do think that one thing that I have found it's a silly statement when people say it, but it's so true. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. And especially as you get older and life changes happen, I'm not saying everybody's like this or everybody fits this mold, but there is a lot of people on this earth that they get to a point where their responsibility changes, right? So when you're a kid, you're your parents' responsibility for a lot of us. And then you get to college and then you start being your own responsibility, right? And then you may or may get lucky and become married. And then you may or may have children or adopt children or et cetera, et cetera. So then your responsibility changes. The more of these stages you go through, there's more people that get involved in this last preparation for yourself. I would dare to say a good time to do it would be when you become a parent. When you become a parent would be a good time to do it, because you need to start thinking about, if something happens, where does this child go? Who becomes these new parents or whatever? Who takes the kids, or how do I protect this for my kids, or et cetera, et cetera. I do think that. I do think if you're at 65 and you don't have a will, you definitely need to get on that. And then if you don't have power of attorney and all that, you need to do, which is a whole different conversation. But I would suggest, I think a normal time to prepare for your death, and we just brought up a topic, right? As soon as you can have that conscious thought, I don't think it's bad to think about what you would want for your death. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But for some people, it may be 20. For some people, it may be 40. I think it would also depend on if somebody had a traumatic loss at an earlier age. I think that kind of gets brought to the foreground. And I think those people, without even planning it, start doing it just because they realize how fast their dad, got in an accident and he was gone. He died. So I don't think there's a right age, but I would say as soon as you can start thinking about those hard, tough topics, I think you should start planning your funeral. That doesn't mean you have to pay for it. That doesn't mean you have to, like I said, as easy as a conversation. We've had this conversation before, Nick, but as easy as you telling your loved ones or your friend or somebody, this is what I want, and maybe start writing some things down. What do you think, Doc?
Well, okay, so the underlined word I had in my mind was, you asked, when do you consider it normal? I would absolutely, I put quotations around the word normal because I don't know if there is a normal, but let's say the average, right? And I would say that the average age that I think that most people do it is probably around what you're saying, in their late 60s, early 70s. But I also think that the reality is like, when do you start thinking about your future? When do you start putting away money for your children to go to college? When do you start doing that stuff? I would imagine that's probably around the time I would say is a healthy time to start thinking about it. Again, this isn't putting anything on paper. This isn't necessarily going and talking to, the lawyer or the funeral director at this moment in time, but it is a good start to think about, like, okay, so I want to take care of my kids, right? That's the idea that a lot of people put money away for college, right? Why don't people put money away for their deaths, for their kids at that point?
It's beautiful, Doc.
Right? I mean, that makes sense, because you would think that, honestly, you still being alive, you're going to still be supportive of them going to college, but you not being alive is probably going to be the hardest time your kids are ever going to deal with.
Well, I think a lot of those, just rebuttal on that, I think that's why a lot of people do the life insurance thing, because that's their, like, oh, this is going to pay for my funeral at the end of the day.
But do a lot of people do life insurance?
I would say a good hefty amount of the individuals.
I mean, you were even bringing up a will. How many people don't do a will?
There's a lot more than you think. Or they haven't done it in 30 years.
Right. So, again, like, don't get me wrong. Life happens. You get busy. Job gets busy. Kids get busy. Obviously, that stuff. But, like, I think when you're really trying to think about your retirement, or you're thinking about the future for your children, or even you never get married, you're thinking about the future of you, or you and your partner. Like, that's, I think, a good time. I think that would be a normal, healthy time to start debating on, even if it is just, the quick conversation with your loved ones. Like, hey, I've been thinking about that. I'm really kind of leaning towards, cremation right now, or whatever, because again, you don't know how much that conversation will help your family out.
Oh, so
if
much,
something
Doc.
traumatic, if something happens
much.
to you. So I think that would be my answer, is like, whenever that age is for you.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And you out there listening, what do you think about what would be a, in quotations, normal time or average time for you? Or what would be your time to want to start thinking about death and dying? And then also, I would like all of you to really think about this whole Freud thing, this whole Eros, the living, and then also Thanatos, dying. What is your thoughts on it? Do you think if we start talking more about death and start striving for a good death, that we're glorifying or beautifying maybe negative death traditions, or I don't know, I'm not saying it right, but you get it. So please reach out to us at letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts, your likes. Please keep listening to us. We're going to keep this up as long as you guys keep phoning in your questions. Phoning in, I like that, right? We gotta
email it in, phone it in.
Please like us. Send us out to people who are really dealing with grief and loss. And as usual, there you go, Doc. If you are not talking about death,
then you aren't living. Thank you so much.